Officer Corbin had played this part 100 times before. A lone woman of color on a deserted stretch of road with no eyes to witness and no one to call for help. Only him and the weight of his authority. He knew precisely how the scene would play out. She would raise her voice. She would insist upon her rights, but in the end she would yield. They always did. But Colonel Seraphina Reyes was not like the rest. He perceived a mere civilian. He failed to see the U.S. Army colonel forged to command, to battle, to conquer. He was oblivious to the discipline, the power, the unbreakable will shaped in theaters of war and critical missions. He didn't grasp that every command he snapped and every maneuver to impose his will was dragging him deeper into his own undoing. And when he went too far, when he grasped for a power that was never his to hold, he didn't just choose the wrong person. He ignited the very conflict that would be his ruin. The setting sun painted golden stripes across the serene expanse of highway as Colonel Seraphina Reyes guided her SUV towards her residence. The drone of the tires on the pavement was a constant, a comforting cadence after a long day attending a military gathering for veterans. She was attired in civilian wear, a navy blue blazer over a clean white blouse with perfectly creased trousers. Her military dress uniform was carefully folded inside a garment bag on the adjacent seat. The medals and insignia denoting her rank securely stowed away. A check of the rearview mirror revealed flashing red and blue strobes closing in at high speed. Her brow tightened. She had not been exceeding the speed limit, had not drifted, had not committed a single infraction. Yet, as she looked again, the cruiser stayed right behind her, demanding she pull to the side. Seraphina let out a sigh and maneuvered onto the shoulder. Years of training whispered for her to remain composed, to manage this with poise and patience, but a feeling of unease gnawed at her. There was absolutely no cause for this stop. She was certain of it. The officer neared, his boots making a crunching sound on the gravel. He was powerfully built with a formal bearing, his badge shining in the dying light. The very moment he got to her window, she saw the look in his eyes. Not inquisitiveness, not professional duty, just that poorly hidden condescension she had met far too often. License and registration, he demanded, his voice sharp. Seraphina kept her motion steady and controlled as she took out her wallet, handing over her driver's license. Is there an issue, officer? He barely looked at it before his eyes shot back to her. His gaze swept over her face, then her hands, as if he were anticipating a wrong move. Step out of the vehicle. Her grasp on the steering wheel tightened almost imperceptibly. Excuse me? Step out of the vehicle, he enunciated again, more slowly this time, challenging her to defy him. Seraphina breathed out deliberately. May I ask why you pulled me over? I was not speeding. I did not swerve. And I am perfectly centered in my lane. What precisely is the justification for this? The officer showed a smirk, the type that felt out of place in a standard traffic stop. Suspicious activity. Get out now. She had witnessed this act before, knew precisely what it was, but she was also wise enough not to escalate the situation on the edge of a lonely road. With controlled patience, she swung her door open and exited, making sure her hands were in plain sight. The officer walked around her SUV looking inside before shifting his focus back to her. Where are you going? Home, Seraphina replied. I just came from a military function. His eyes narrowed a fraction. Military, huh? He chuckled. And what exactly do you profess to be? Seraphina raised her chin, her voice steady. I'm Colonel Seraphina Reyes, United States Army. A moment of quiet passed. Then a scoff. He surveyed her once more slowly this time, as though he were reassessing everything she had just declared. The smirk on his face grew wider, as if he had discovered her in a fabrication. Oh, really, Colonel? He drew out the word, the doubt thick in his tone. Are you positive about that? Seraphina's jaw clenched. Yes. He let out a short laugh. And where's your military ID, Colonel? Seraphina felt inside her blazer pocket. Empty. Her brow furrowed for a second as she checked the other side, then calmly retrieved her wallet. She searched through it, checking each slot, but found nothing. Her thoughts raced. She always had her ID. It was instinct. Could she have left it in the vehicle? No. She would have placed it somewhere safe. She checked her blazer's inner pocket one more time, but it was still empty. Then it came to her. The last time she'd held it was before the function, when she had changed from her uniform that was still inside her locker on the base. She met the officer's eyes. "I don't have my military ID with me, but he cut her off, his smirk intensifying. "How convenient." He flipped her driver's license over in his hand, wrapping it against his palm. "No veteran designation either. That's odd, isn't it? A whole colonel like you with no evidence of it." Seraphina refused to show her aggravation. "This is my vehicle. My registration is in the glove compartment. You are welcome to look at it." "Oh, I will be looking at more than that," he stated, already moving past her towards the car. She turned abruptly. "You do not have probable cause to search my vehicle." His smirk grew deeper. "Suspicious behavior is all I need. And I must say you're behaving quite nervously, ma'am." The way he pronounced it, laden with condescension, made it obvious he was not showing respect. Seraphina clenched her jaw. She had met men just like him before. Officers who thought their badge granted them the right to persecute people like her. She knew she had two paths: protest and escalate, or stand back and play a different strategy. And Seraphina Reyes never engaged in a game she couldn't win, because the instant he overstepped, and she knew he would, she would be prepared. Seraphina's breathing stayed even, but her heart rate increased as she mentally retraced her path. Her military ID was not in her blazer. It was not in her wallet. Then the realization struck her. She had left it in her uniform's pocket inside her locker at the base. Her eyes moved to Corbin, who was standing a few feet off, arms folded, observing her. Not as an officer maintaining order, but as a man anticipating her failure. She stood taller, adjusting her blazer. "As I stated, I'm Colonel Seraphina Reyes, United States Army. My ID is inside my uniform, which is currently locked in my locker on base." Corbin let out a long, theatrical whistle, shaking his head. "Is that so? You want me to just believe you?" "It's the truth." And yet, he pondered, holding her license between two fingers, flipping it over idly. "I don't find Colonel written anywhere on here. No veteran status, no military rank, not even a clue that you ever put on a uniform." He clicked his tongue. One would think a true soldier would ensure people knew. Seraphina did not fall for the provocation. She had dealt with men like Corbin previously. Officers who brandished authority like a club, who took a single look at her skin, at her face, and concluded she was out of place. This was not about her identification. It was about power. "Your department must have a database," she said evenly. "Check my name. You will find my service record." Corbin let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, I could, but I don't want to. You see, I prefer to handle things the traditional way." His smile grew sharp. "So what about this? Step out of the car." Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "I have already complied with your request to pull over. Now you are escalating without cause." "Ma'am," Corbin said, mock patience heavy in his voice. "I asked politely. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." Seraphina stood her ground. "I am not stepping out unless you provide me a lawful cause." Corbin's smirk vanished, replaced by a colder look. "You are disobeying an officer's command." "I am refusing an illegal request," she corrected, her voice controlled. "You have no probable cause for a search of my vehicle, and you surely have no reason to hold me." Corbin let out a long dramatic sigh and drummed his fingers on his belt. "See, this is the point where things become complicated. A motorist refusing a legal order from law enforcement. That seems like resisting. And resisting," he clucked his tongue, "that turns ugly very quickly." Seraphina held her position firmly, but she sensed the change. He was through with games. He wanted to provoke her, to make her react, to create a justification for whatever he had already planned to do. "You wouldn't be threatening me with arrest now, would you?" she asked, cocking her head slightly. Corbin leaned forward slightly, his voice just soft enough to feign concern, just loud enough to deliver the weight of a threat. "I'm suggesting, Colonel, if that is who you truly are, that disobeying a direct command from law enforcement never turns out well." And just between us, his lips curved up. "I don't believe you are special enough to be an exception." Seraphina knew his objective. She had instructed soldiers in psychological warfare, in how to bait an adversary into a blunder. He wanted a reaction, a reason to escalate. She would not provide it. Instead, she met his eyes, unflinching. "I know my rights, Officer Corbin, and I know your game. So either arrest me or let me go." The space between them vibrated, thick with unspoken hostility. Corbin had anticipated submission, anticipated his intimidation would work. But Seraphina was not scared of him, and that enraged him. His hand tightened at his side, hovering near his radio. His jaw clenched as he moved a step closer, his voice dropping into something colder. "Have it your way." Seraphina stayed motionless, refusing to retreat. Corbin exhaled forcefully. "You're under arrest." Seraphina stayed perfectly still, her breath even as Corbin glared at her, expecting a reaction. When she did not flinch, did not move an inch, his lip curled slightly, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Then, without breaking his gaze, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I have a potential 10 to 29. Send backup to this location." His voice was self-satisfied, every word deliberate. Seraphina knew precisely what he was doing. 10 to 29 wanted person. He was intentionally escalating, creating a narrative before confirming a single fact. She breathed out slowly. "You are making a mistake, Officer Corbin." Corbin clipped his radio back onto his belt, giving her a slow, derisive smirk. "Is that right? Because from my perspective, refusing to cooperate with law enforcement is the mistake." He gestured toward her SUV. "Now stand aside." Seraphina did not budge. "You do not have probable cause to search my vehicle." Corbin took a step nearer, lowering his voice as if offering her a final opportunity. "And yet I'm going to search it regardless." Seraphina's jaw tightened. "That would constitute an illegal search." Corbin shrugged. "You seem very worried about the law all of a sudden. If there is nothing to hide, then you have no cause for concern." Before she could utter another word, he turned and wrenched open the driver's side door. Seraphina balled her fists at her sides, compelling herself to remain immobile. Reacting would give him exactly what he wanted, a pretext to escalate further. Corbin leaned inside, rummaging through the center console before forcing open the glove compartment. Documents and personal effects were flung onto the seat carelessly. His actions were purposeful, reckless, as if he were intent on discovering something, anything, to validate his behavior. "Running a little enterprise out of this vehicle, Colonel," he mumbled, digging through her possessions. "Smuggling contraband. Perhaps stolen military equipment." Seraphina let out a steady breath. "You are overstepping a boundary." Corbin hardly gave her a look. "Lady, I don't see any boundary." He shifted to the passenger side, flinging open the door and rifling through the storage areas, flipping open her handbag, spilling its contents onto the seat. Seraphina refused to react. Instead, she reached into her pocket, feeling the sleek surface of her phone against her fingers. She knew exactly the person to contact. Without a sound, she turned slightly, angling herself away from Corbin, and discreetly navigated her contacts list. Then, with a composed look, she pressed the call icon and brought the phone to her ear. She didn't need to say a lot. "This is Colonel Reyes," she stated smoothly. "I require a favor immediately." Corbin was too preoccupied with ransacking her belongings to see that the rules of the game had already shifted. Corbin's frustration mounted with each passing moment. He had anticipated finding something, anything to confirm his instinct, something to show that this woman was not who she presented herself to be. But the deeper he searched through Seraphina's things, the less he discovered. His hands ripped through the glove compartment, the center console, even beneath the seats, tossing her personal belongings carelessly to the floor. Seraphina stood just a few feet away, motionless as a statue, observing, waiting. Her silence only fueled Corbin's fury. He slammed the passenger door closed, turning to her with a sneer. Where is it? Seraphina blinked. Where is what? Corbin let out a sharp exhalation, gesturing toward the chaos he had created in her car. Whatever you have hidden. Fake IDs. Stolen merchandise. Drugs. He cut himself off, realizing how absurd he sounded. Seraphina did not move, did not speak, and that infuriated him. You think this is some kind of joke? He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something sharper. You think because you remain calm I'm supposed to just abandon this? Seraphina lifted her chin slightly, her expression unreadable. Are you done? Corbin scoffed, shaking his head. Oh, we are only just beginning. He pulled out his radio, pressing the button with more force than was needed. Dispatch, I need K9 assistance for a complete vehicle search. Possible narcotics or contraband. Then his radio sputtered. An incoming transmission. Unit 13, cease all further action. You have an immediate call coming through from command. Patch it through now. Corbin frowned. Command? He hadn't contacted anyone higher than his shift commander. Still holding his radio, he took a few steps away and changed channels. This is Officer Corbin. Go ahead. There was a beat of silence. Then a voice, sharp, commanding, and livid. Officer Corbin, this is Captain Valerius. What in the hell do you think you are doing? Corbin went rigid. Captain from HQ. His mouth fell open but no sound emerged. Are you deaf? Valerius snapped. You are illegally detaining Colonel Seraphina Reyes, a highly decorated officer of the United States Army. You will cease your actions at once. Stand down and bring her to the station for a formal apology. Now. Corbin swallowed. His fingers trembled on the radio. Sir, You what? You disregarded protocol. You illegally searched her vehicle. You harassed a senior officer like some provincial rookie on a power trip. Seraphina remained where she stood, her expression placid, her posture unwavering. Corbin's eyes snapped to her, his blood boiling. This wasn't right. How could they have known? The gravity of his blunder crashed into him like a locomotive. The radio crackled once more. You are wasting time, Corbin. Get in your vehicle, drive her to the station, and report to my office the instant you get there. You had better hope I don't take your badge by day's end. The line went silent. Corbin stood frozen, his grip on the radio tightening, shame burning through him. Seraphina stepped forward, her movements smooth, effortless. She met his gaze with the same unshakable calm she had displayed from the start. Are you done? She asked again, her voice unwavering. Corbin's jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. He had no alternative. Without a word he marched toward his patrol car and wrenched open the door. He didn't look at her as he growled, "Get in." Seraphina breathed out, walking toward her own car. She calmly gathered her possessions, placing them back in their rightful spots before closing the door behind her. Then with the same deliberate pace she walked to the patrol car. She entered the back seat not as a suspect, not as a felon, but as the one in absolute control. Corbin slammed his door shut, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His foot crushed the accelerator, the tires screaming on the pavement as they pulled away from the shoulder. Seraphina settled in, her gaze fixed forward, her voice even. Drive safely, officer. Corbin gritted his teeth so hard he thought he tasted blood. The journey to the station was silent except for the anxious hum of the cruiser's engine. Corbin held the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were stark white. His jaw was locked so hard it was painful. Seraphina sat in the back, calm, collected, and entirely untroubled. She had won and he knew it. When they arrived in the station's parking lot, Corbin hardly gave the engine time to stop before slamming the car into park. Without speaking he threw the door open and got out, his actions rigid with barely controlled anger. Seraphina followed at her own pace, exiting with composed ease. Inside, the atmosphere changed the moment they entered. The whole precinct was aware. Officers at their desks shot furtive looks. Some murmuring to each other. Others avoiding Corbin's gaze completely. The sergeant at the front desk barely lifted his head before using the intercom. She's here. Seraphina noted the way Corbin's shoulders stiffened. He knew what was ahead. A few moments later the police chief came out of his office. A man with graying hair, a strong jaw, and a no-nonsense look that sliced across the room like a razor. Chief Alistair Finch. Seraphina had encountered men like him before. Traditional law enforcement, sharp but politically astute. He assessed the situation instantly. Seraphina standing tall, Corbin rigid and quiet beside her, his face dark. Colonel Reyes, Finch said, his voice curt but polite. He turned to Corbin. My office. Now. Corbin paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the chief's brow to twitch with a warning before he stiffly walked past Seraphina toward the office. Seraphina followed without rushing. Once they were inside, Finch closed the door with a decisive click. The air was heavy with tension. Corbin stood at attention, but his fingers twitched at his sides, his frustration barely contained. Seraphina took a seat, crossing one leg over the other. The chief directed his glare at Corbin first. I want to know what in the hell possessed you to think detaining a United States Army colonel was a smart move. Corbin's jaw tightened. Sir, she was non-compliant. She had no ID, no veteran status on her license. How was I to know she wasn't fabricating her story? Finch's stare intensified. You know how. Because you were supposed to run her name. Because you were supposed to follow procedure. Because instead of performing your damn job you chose to harass an individual who outranks you in every conceivable way. Corbin didn't budge, but Seraphina could see the fury boiling just beneath his surface. Sir, save it. Finch leaned in, his voice dropping. Do you have any clue what kind of disaster I'm managing right now? The Pentagon contacted me. The Pentagon. You have just brought shame upon this entire department. Corbin's lips tightened into a thin line, his hands forming fists at his sides. Seraphina observed silently, not needing to speak a single word. Finch sighed, then faced Seraphina. Colonel Reyes, I wish to formally apologize for this department's failure today. This never should have occurred. Seraphina nodded, acknowledging it but not allowing it to diminish the gravity of the moment. I expect to see procedural adjustments to ensure this does not happen again, Chief. Finch gave a decisive nod. Understood. Then he turned back to Corbin. Apologize. Now. Corbin froze. His fists clenched, his nostrils flared, but he had no other option. He slowly faced Seraphina, barely keeping his voice steady. I apologize. Seraphina tilted her head slightly. For what? Corbin's jaw twitched. He knew her game, and he detested it. I apologize, he spat out. Colonel, for the inconvenience. Finch's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. Try again. Corbin swallowed hard, his throat moving. I apologize for my behavior today. I was wrong. The words sounded like poison coming from him. It will not happen again. Seraphina watched him closely. The words were spoken. The sincerity was absent. She didn't need it to be. She had already won. Finch breathed out sharply. Effective immediately, Officer Corbin, you are suspended pending an investigation. If it were up to me, I would have your badge this evening. He narrowed his eyes. You're fortunate I don't. Corbin flinched at that. Humiliation settling deep into his being. Seraphina stood, smoothing her blazer. I appreciate your cooperation, Chief. Seraphina directed her gaze to him, observing the way he shifted uneasily under the weight of his own failure. You manipulated me, he mumbled under his breath. Seraphina raised an eyebrow. I didn't need to. Corbin's nostrils flared, his fury barely held in check. He had lost his control, lost his power, and it enraged him. Seraphina tilted her head slightly. I told you that you were making a mistake. Finch's glare snapped to Corbin. I don't want to hear another damn word from you at this moment. Corbin closed his mouth, but the expression in his eyes was unmistakable. This was not finished. Seraphina knew men like him. He would not let this go, and that meant she had to be prepared. The following morning Seraphina slid into the driver's seat of her SUV, breathing out as she adjusted her rearview mirror, taking a moment to survey the quiet road ahead. The air was sharp, the sun just beginning its climb, throwing long shadows across the highway as the gentle hum of early morning activity settled around her. Although the world seemed peaceful, she was not one to let appearances dictate her perception. There was always something lurking beneath, something waiting to be perceived. And she had devoted her life to learning how to see it before it showed itself. She was not anxious, but she was not at ease either. After years in the military, she had learned a single, simple truth. When a man like Corbin is humiliated, he does not move on. Some men understood failure, accepted it as a lesson, proceeded with the knowledge that life goes on whether they approve or not. Others, men like Corbin, allowed it to devour them. Allowed it to burrow under their skin, nourishing itself on the anger and bitterness that festered within. His failure was not something he could process. He had lost something he never imagined could be taken from him. His authority, his control, his power to intimidate and demand obedience without question. And men like him did not simply let that go. They devised ways to reclaim it. She had seen it before. The way he clenched his jaw so tightly it looked as if his teeth might shatter. The way his hands curled into fists at his sides. The way his entire form radiated a silent rage. He was barely holding it in. He had not been sorry for his actions. He had been sorry that he had been defeated. The idea of altering her daily route lasted only a moment. She had rejected it almost as quickly as it had entered her thoughts. Avoiding a road, changing her own life, making concessions for a man who had already tried to control her once and failed was not an option. The only thing avoiding him would achieve was granting him the satisfaction of knowing he had influenced her decisions. And she would not permit that. She had done nothing wrong, and she would not begin behaving as if she had. So she drove the same route, her actions natural, her mind sharp but untroubled. The highway unfolded before her, silent, largely deserted except for the random truck or early traveler. The soft hum of the tires on the pavement filled the air around her, the distant horizon stretching vast and unbroken. She remained steady, her hold on the wheel relaxed, her breathing even, her eyes absorbing everything without seeming to be searching for anything. And then she noticed it. The dark-colored sedan materialized in her rearview mirror, shifting into her lane in a manner that did not immediately raise an alarm. Yet it triggered a quiet awareness in the back of her mind. It had been a few cars behind just moments ago, blending into the early morning traffic without attracting notice. But now it was closing the gap with a sense of purpose that made her sit up a little straighter in her seat. She did not react visibly, did not make any sudden moves that would show she had seen it. But she was observing. The sedan was not tailgating, was not trying to pass, was not matching its speed to the natural rhythm of the traffic. It was simply following, hovering. Seraphina breathed out slowly, maintaining a casual posture, her grip firm but her mind alert. If this was a coincidence, if this was just another commuter on the highway going the same way, the car would either switch lanes or overtake her in the next few moments. But it did not. Instead, it moved closer. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel, not from nervousness but from calculation. It was too intentional. A typical driver would not stay in someone's blind spot for this duration, would not drift forward with such deliberate precision without signaling a desire to pass or move away. Then, without any warning, the sedan accelerated. It was not a casual increase in speed. It was not a gradual press of the gas pedal as a driver found their pace. It was deliberate, sharp, a forward surge meant to close the gap too quickly, too aggressively. Seraphina felt it before it completely registered. Her body had already tensed before her mind confirmed the danger. Instincts firing in perfect sync with reality. Because she knew this was not an impatient driver. This was not an accident. This was an assault. Her gaze flickered to the side mirror, and in the briefest of moments her eyes met the driver's. Corbin, not in uniform, his face contorted in pure, raw rage. His hands gripping the wheel with a force that spoke of barely contained fury. There was no calculated restraint now. No fabricated authority from a badge. No thin disguise of professionalism to hide behind. There was only rage. Only a man who had lost control of his existence and had decided the only way to get it back was to take control of hers. Seraphina inhaled through her nose, her pulse steady, her mind already calculating the variables. He had nothing left to lose at this point. That made him dangerous, but it also made him careless. He drew nearer, the sedan pushing into her space, attempting to force her toward the shoulder, trying to trap her before she had a chance to react. She didn't respond with fear. She didn't slam on the brakes, didn't jerk the wheel, didn't give him the panic he was anticipating, the loss of control he was relying on. Instead, she let the SUV drift just a little, just enough to create the illusion that she was reacting purely on instinct. She watched as he fell for the bait. The moment he surged forward to cut her off, she flicked on her turn signal. The small, seemingly automatic action designed to make him think he had her trapped. Corbin lunged for the opening, moving in to force her into an error. And that was his error. At the very last second, she spun the wheel sharply in the opposite direction, completely disrupting his path. His tires shrieked against the pavement as he overcompensated, yanking the wheel too hard in his frantic attempt to recover. Seraphina remained smooth, controlled, watching the way his face twisted in frustration, the realization starting to sink in that she wasn't going to panic. Wasn't going to collapse under the pressure. Wasn't going to make it simple for him. But Corbin was not done. He adjusted quickly, pushing forward again, more erratically now, more aggressively, his car swerving toward her with reckless resolve. The pursuit continued, their vehicles entangled in a perilous dance for control. The scenery changed as the open highway transitioned to a more isolated stretch of road, an empty expanse of pavement where no other cars were present. Seraphina knew at the instant they passed the final exit sign, the moment the road stretched out wide and empty. Corbin had brought her here intentionally, and she had followed willingly. Ahead, the highway bent, narrowing into a remote section bordered by nothing but trees and open space. Corbin slowed, his car drifting toward the center of the road, forcing the confrontation to a halt. Seraphina eased off the accelerator, fingers flexing on the wheel, breathing evenly. The road ahead was vacant, free of traffic or any potential witnesses, leaving just the two of them in the vast, empty space. She had known this confrontation was coming. And now that it was here, there was nothing left to do but conclude what had already been set in motion. Seraphina brought her SUV to a controlled stop, her hands firm on the wheel as she scanned the isolated stretch of road before her. The trees stood tall on both sides, casting long shadows across the pavement. The heavy silence hanging between the two vehicles like a tangible entity. The moment her tires ceased to roll, she breathed out slowly, rolled her shoulders once, feeling the tension build like a gathering storm. In front of her, Corbin slammed his sedan into park with such violence that the tires screamed against the asphalt. Before the car had even fully stopped, his door flew open and he charged out, his movements sharp, his rage evident in every stride. Seraphina watched, her gaze calm, unreadable, as he slammed the door behind him and moved toward her, his posture stiff with barely contained fury. "You think you're clever, don't you?" His voice echoed across the empty road, laced with something toxic, something raw. "You think this little game of yours means you've won?" Seraphina didn't move right away. Instead, she took a moment to evaluate him, observing the way his fists clenched at his sides, the way his chest heaved with uneven breaths, the way his jaw twitched as if he were barely keeping himself together. He was coming apart, and she had seen it coming from the moment she had left that police station. Finally, with deliberate composure, she unfastened her seat belt and pushed the door open, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The world around them was silent. The emptiness of the road heightening the tension crackling between them. She closed the door behind her, meeting his stare with the same composed intensity she had maintained since the beginning of all this. "If I recall correctly," she said, her voice steady, "you were the one pursuing me." Corbin let out a sharp, joyless laugh, running a hand over his face before dropping it with a hard exhalation. "Pursuing you? Is that what you call this?" He took a step forward, his eyes burning. "I call it correcting a mistake." Seraphina arched a brow, tilting her head slightly. "And what mistake would that be?" Corbin's teeth clenched, his entire body rigid. Letting you walk away as if you won. Letting you humiliate me. Letting you believe you could pull the kind of stunt you did and not face the consequences. He took another step closer, his voice dropping lower, more menacing. You think you shamed me back at that station. You think you made me appear weak. Seraphina held her position, her gaze unwavering. You did that all by yourself. His face grew darker, his expression contorting into something more hideous. You don't understand, do you? You don't grasp how people like you don't just get to walk around acting untouchable as if you can just defy authority and escape it. You think because you made your little phone call, because you got the right people involved, that it makes you superior to me. Seraphina inhaled slowly, keeping her tone even. No. I think abiding by the law makes me superior to you. Corbin's nostrils flared, his body tensing like a wound-up spring. You think that badge meant anything to me. You think I needed it to put you in your place. Seraphina tilted her head, studying him, her gaze sharp, unwavering. No. But it was the only thing stopping you from making a true mistake. And now that it's gone, you're spiraling. Corbin let out a bitter laugh, but there was no amusement in it. You think I'm spiraling, lady? You have no idea the amount of restraint I have been showing. His hands flexed at his sides, his fingers twitching as if they were itching to do something more. I've had to hear people talk about how I messed up. I've had to watch them whisper behind my back. Look at me as if I was the problem when all I was doing was my job. And you, he pointed at her, his hand trembling with the weight of his anger. You sit there acting so damn smug, like you're untouchable, like you're better than me. You think you can just keep pushing, keep playing these little games, and walk away without repercussions. Seraphina's expression remained unreadable. This is not a game, Corbin. It never was. You lost because you were wrong, and instead of confronting that, you chose to blame me for it. Corbin took another step forward, closing the space between them, his voice sharp and bitter. And you decided to play the victim, right? Poor little Colonel being harassed by the big bad cop. Making sure everyone sees you as the hero in this narrative. You got exactly what you wanted. Seraphina exhaled, the weight of his words rolling off her like water on stone. If I got what I wanted, you would not be standing here right now. For a second something shifted in his expression. Something close to realization, close to understanding just how far he had pushed this. But it disappeared just as quickly, consumed by his pride, his hatred, his absolute refusal to accept reality. You don't get to decide how this ends, he growled. Seraphina squared her shoulders, keeping her voice calm, deliberate. No, but you do. You can walk away at this very moment. Get in your car and drive off before you do something you can't take back. Corbin's breath was ragged, his chest rising and falling too quickly. His hands curling into fists at his sides. His entire body trembled with the force of his anger, with the unbearable weight of knowing that everything had been taken from him, and that she was the reason why. That's not how this is going to go, he muttered. Seraphina sighed, shaking her head. Then I guess you really are as predictable as I thought. Corbin's temper snapped like a live wire. Corbin lunged at her with all the force of a man who had been anticipating this moment, who had let his fury build to a point of no return, who had convinced himself that the only way to reclaim what he had lost was to break her down first. Seraphina had already assessed him long before the first punch was thrown. His movements were clumsy, driven by rage instead of skill. The kind of assault that comes from someone who has spent years relying on intimidation and raw power rather than refined technique. She sidestepped effortlessly, her stance shifting as his fist sliced through empty air. The force of his own momentum carrying him forward in a way that left him briefly vulnerable. She could have ended it right there. One sharp blow to his exposed ribs, a calculated elbow to his throat, a single well-aimed kick to his knee would have sent him to the ground. But this was not just about stopping him. This was about ensuring he understood. Corbin barely had a moment to recover before he came at her again. His frustration growing with every failed attempt, his movements becoming more erratic. His second swing was wilder than the first, aimed at her jaw, reckless and desperate. Seraphina ducked just under it, moving to his side before he could recover. Her elbow snapped forward and slammed into his ribs with enough force to make him stagger. He let out a sharp grunt, his breath catching from the blow, but it was not enough to stop him. If anything, it only made him more furious. "You," he snarled, spinning to face her again, his teeth bared like a cornered animal. "Think you're so damn superior, don't you?" Seraphina did not reply. She did not have to. She had already taken his measure. Had already seen exactly what he was. A man out of his element. Corbin charged again, this time lowering his posture, attempting to tackle her. He thought he could use his size against her. Thought if he got close enough he could overpower her by brute force alone. It was a miscalculation. Seraphina waited until the final second. Let him fully commit, and then shifted her weight, twisting sharply as she hooked her foot behind his leg, using his own momentum against him. Corbin hit the pavement hard. The impact sent a shockwave through him, his back slamming against the asphalt, the air forced from his lungs in a choked gasp. He had expected to be on top, to have her pinned, but instead he was the one sprawled across the road. Disoriented, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just transpired. Seraphina took a step back, not from hesitation, but to give him the illusion of recovery. She could end it here, could press her knee against his chest, could render him unconscious with a single precise blow. But that was not sufficient. Corbin needed to feel every single second of this defeat. He coughed, rolling onto his hands and knees, his breath ragged as he pushed himself up. His face was contorted in something between rage and disbelief, as if his brain could not fully process what his body was feeling. Seraphina tilted her head slightly. "Are you finished?" The question landed like a slap, cutting deeper than any physical blow ever could. Corbin's hands curled into fists, his knuckles scraped from the fall. But he was not ready to concede defeat. Not yet. With a guttural growl he lunged again, this time feinting left before swinging his right fist toward her ribs. It was more clever than his previous attempts, but still too slow. Seraphina caught his wrist in mid-swing, twisting it with an efficiency that sent a sharp jolt of pain up his arm, forcing him to his knees before he could even register what had happened. His body followed the motion instinctively, trying to alleviate the pressure, but she did not let go. She leaned in, her voice low, unshaken. "You don't know when to stop, do you?" Corbin gritted his teeth, his free hand reaching for her, still trying to resist. Seraphina let out a slow breath. She was done letting him set the pace. With a calculated pivot she yanked his trapped arm forward while sweeping his leg out from under him, sending him crashing to the pavement a second time, harder than before. His head bounced against the ground, his vision momentarily blurring from the impact. Seraphina stepped back, watching him struggle, watching the slow, dawning realization creep into his expression. He was losing and there was nothing he could do to change it. For a moment neither of them spoke. The only sound between them was the harsh rhythm of his breathing as he lay there, staring up at the sky as if trying to convince himself this was not real. Seraphina did not move. Did not press her advantage. She knew he would come at her again. She had already seen it in him. He was not finished. No matter how much his body was failing him, no matter how obvious it was that this was a fight he could not win, he would rather destroy himself than admit defeat. And so she waited. Corbin groaned, his head tilting slightly, his gaze unfocused but still filled with anger. He rolled onto his side, then his hands, pushing himself up once more. He should have remained down. Seraphina exhaled, rolling her shoulders, preparing herself for the next exchange. She had given him every chance to stop. Now she would end it. Corbin spat blood onto the pavement, his body racked with fatigue. Yet his pride still demanded he continue fighting. His hands trembled as he pushed himself up, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps, but Seraphina could see it in his eyes. He still was not ready to accept the reality of this defeat. Seraphina rolled her shoulders, her stance unwavering as she watched him. He was slower now, his movements no longer driven by raw aggression but by desperation. The dawning realization that the power he thought he possessed was slipping away completely. "Stay down, Corbin," she said, her voice level, calm, almost a warning. But Corbin was not a man who knew when to quit. He growled through gritted teeth, forcing himself upright, his hands clenching into fists that barely had the strength to hold their shape. His pride would not let him stay on the ground. His mind refused to process that he was losing, that he had already lost. With a snarl of rage he lunged again, swinging wild and hard, putting everything he had left into one desperate attempt to take her down. Seraphina moved to counter, but this time he connected. His fist collided with her ribs, the impact sending a shock wave of pain through her side. She grunted, her body instinctively tensing against the hit, but she refused to give him the reaction he craved. Corbin saw his opportunity and swung again, this time clipping her jaw hard enough to send a jolt through her skull. But Seraphina had been hit before. She had been in real fights. Fights that did not leave room for hesitation. Fights where hesitation meant death. Corbin had no idea what kind of storm he had just unleashed. Seraphina took a step back, shaking off the sting, her jaw tightening. If he wanted to prolong this, she would allow it. But it would only make his defeat that much more unbearable. He charged again, reckless, thinking he had a second wind. Thinking that those 2 hits meant he was turning this fight around. He was mistaken. Seraphina sidestepped sharply, cutting to his flank. And before he could adjust, she hooked her arm around his throat, yanking him backward into a brutal chokehold. Corbin choked on his own breath. His hands immediately clawing at her arm, struggling against the iron grip that locked around his throat. He bucked, tried to twist out of it, but Seraphina tightened the hold, locking her legs around his waist, forcing him down. His entire body jerked. Panic setting in as his air supply was cut off. His fingers scrambled against her arm, trying to pry her off. His movements becoming more erratic, more desperate with each passing second. Seraphina kept her hold steady. "It's over, Corbin," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "You're done." Corbin refused to accept it. He thrashed, his feet kicking against the pavement, his nails digging into her skin, trying anything to break free. Seraphina did not loosen her grip. She did not let go. Corbin's movements became slower, weaker. His gasps turning into shallow, ragged noises. His pride had carried him this far. But pride did not matter when your body was shutting down. When your lungs were screaming for oxygen. When the world around you was starting to fade. His hands, once filled with fight, began to shake. His legs, once kicking wildly, went still. And then, finally, the moment she had been waiting for. Corbin let out a strangled, broken sound, the last remnants of his pride slipping away. He couldn't win. He couldn't fight anymore. And he knew it. His voice came out, barely above a whisper. "Please." Seraphina did not move. "What was that?" Corbin whimpered, his body completely giving up, his breath hitching with humiliation. "Please let me go." Seraphina held the choke for just a few more seconds, letting him sit in his own complete and utter failure before finally releasing him. She shoved him forward, his body crumpling onto the pavement, coughing violently as air rushed back into his lungs. Corbin lay there gasping, humiliated, shaking. Seraphina pushed herself up, rolling her shoulders, ignoring the dull ache in her ribs and jaw. She had taken a few hits, but compared to what he had just endured it was nothing. Corbin coughed, his hands pressing against the ground, his entire body trembling from the exertion. But Seraphina saw something else in his eyes now. Something new. For the first time he looked afraid. Not just of her, of what he had become. She took a step forward, watching the way he flinched. How his entire body tensed like he expected another strike. Expected more punishment. But she did not hit him. She just looked at him. "You brought this on yourself," she said quietly. "You could have walked away, Corbin. You could have moved on, but you didn't. And now here you are." Corbin swallowed thickly, his throat raw, his shoulders slumped. He looked small, defeated, like the weight of his own choices had finally crushed him. But then in the silence something shifted. Corbin's breathing evened, his fingers curling against the pavement. And before Seraphina could move, he sprang forward, scrambling to his feet, bolting toward his car. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. He was not just trying to escape. He was running. Not on her watch. Corbin sprinted toward his car. His body still aching, his breath uneven, but his mind was locked onto one singular goal. Escape. His pride had already been shattered, his body beaten. But if he could just get in the car, if he could just get away, he could convince himself that he still had something left. That this was not the end. Seraphina, however, was not about to let that happen. Her muscles fired before the thought even fully formed. Her feet pounding against the pavement as she launched after him, closing the distance in seconds. Corbin was fast, but he was running on pure adrenaline, his body betraying him with every faltering step. Seraphina, trained for endurance, for control, for the exact kind of chase he was attempting, moved like a shadow at his heels. Corbin reached his car, fingers grasping at the door handle. But before he could pull it open, Seraphina cut in from the side, slamming her palm against the door, forcing it shut. He barely had time to react before she pivoted, driving her elbow into his ribs with precise force. Corbin stumbled against the car, his breath exploding from his lungs in a sharp, choked gasp. His body, already battered and weakened, failed him as he sagged against the vehicle. His knees buckling for just a moment before he caught himself against the hood. Seraphina was not done. She stepped in front of him, positioning herself between him and any possible escape. Her SUV was angled just behind his sedan, boxing him in. He had nowhere to run. Corbin, still gasping, turned, his body pressing against the car as if it could somehow swallow him whole. As if there was still some way out of this. His hands curled into weak fists, his bruised knuckles trembling at his sides. Seraphina rolled her shoulders, completely composed, watching him with a look that made it clear she was still in control. That no amount of scrambling or desperate lunging would change how this ended. "You done running?" she asked, her voice steady. Corbin swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, his breath still too shallow, his body still leaning too much on the car behind him for support. His silence was answer enough. Seraphina exhaled, tilting her head slightly. "Did you really think you'd get away after everything?" Corbin's jaw clenched, but there was no real defiance left in his eyes. There was no victory here, no moment of triumph, no last-ditch effort that could change the outcome. Seraphina took a step closer, forcing him to shrink back against the metal. "You could have walked away," she said. Matter of fact, almost tired. "You could have taken your loss and moved on. But you don't know how to let things go, do you?" Corbin let out a slow, ragged breath, his hands twitching like he wanted to say something, like he wanted to defend himself, but nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. Seraphina studied him for a long moment, watching the tension in his body, the subtle way he shifted his weight. Even now, even when there was nothing left, even when his own exhaustion was dragging him down like an anchor, he was still searching for something. One last move. One last opening. She sighed. "Don't," she warned. Corbin's breath hitched, his muscles tensing for half a second. Seraphina saw it before it even happened. He lunged, going for her in one final desperate attempt to turn the tide, but she was already moving. With a sharp, calculated motion she sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him forward before catching him by the arm and twisting sharply, sending him crashing face first against the hood of his own car. Corbin let out a pained grunt, his cheek pressing against the heated metal, his hands pinned beneath Seraphina's grip. She leaned in just slightly, her voice low, unshaken. "You lost, Corbin. This is over." Corbin let out a muffled curse, his breath hitching. But there was no fight left. He lay there, his body heavy, his fingers twitching against the hood of the car, the final bitter remnants of his resistance dying out with every passing second. Seraphina held him there a moment longer, making sure he felt every single ounce of his failure, making sure there was no room left for delusion, for any pathetic notion that he still had a way out of this. Then, finally, she let go. Corbin slumped forward, his forehead resting against the hood of his car, his shoulders rising and falling with uneven breaths. Seraphina took a step back, rolling her wrists, shaking out the last of the tension that had settled in her muscles. Her ribs still ached from where he had hit her earlier, her jaw still tight from the impact. But compared to what he had just endured, it was nothing. She tilted her head slightly, watching as Corbin stayed exactly where he was, his hands limp against the metal, his entire body radiating defeat. "You really should have known better," she said. "Calm. Steady. Men like you always think you can do whatever you want. You think you can abuse your power, intimidate people into submission, control every situation you walk into. And for a while you probably got away with it." She took another step back, her voice lowering. "But that ends today." Corbin didn't respond. He just sat there, broken and humiliated. The weight of reality finally crashing down on him. Corbin did not move. He remained slumped against the hood of his car. His hands splayed weakly against the heated metal, his shoulders rising and falling in uneven breaths. The fight had drained him, left him with nothing but the weight of his own mistakes pressing down on him like an anchor, suffocating in its finality. Seraphina took a slow, measured breath, letting the moment stretch just long enough for the reality of it all to fully sink in. Then, with the same calm efficiency she had maintained throughout the entire encounter, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved smoothly over the screen as she dialed. Her voice steady, unshaken when the line clicked open. "This is Colonel Seraphina Reyes," she said, her tone sharp and professional. The authority in her voice unmistakable. "I need officers dispatched to my location immediately. I am reporting an assault and attempted vehicular homicide. The suspect is restrained and currently non-compliant." Corbin stiffened. For the first time since the fight had ended he moved, just barely, a flinch, a tensing of his jaw, the last remnants of whatever delusion he had left crumbling into dust. Seraphina ignored him, speaking clearly into the phone as she relayed the necessary details, ensuring there was no room for misinterpretation. "Yes," she continued, her voice unwavering. "The suspect is an officer." "Corbin." "Yes, that Corbin. I'll give my full statement upon arrival. Have them come prepared." She ended the call, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Her movements deliberate, unrushed. Corbin shifted against the car, his knuckles pressing harder into the hood. His breathing now more erratic. He was not just humiliated anymore. He was panicking. "Wait," he croaked, his voice rough, the desperation finally breaking through. Seraphina tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Corbin swallowed, his throat working around the words, his pride still trying to hold on to something. "Anything. You don't have to do this," he rasped, turning his head just enough to look at her from the corner of his eye. "You already won." Seraphina exhaled, unimpressed. "And what exactly do you think happens next?" Corbin, his lips parted. But nothing came out because even now, even after everything, he still hadn't accepted the full reality of his situation. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You came after me. You tried to run me off the road. You attacked me. You escalated until this was the only way it could end. And now, because you couldn't control yourself, you're going to face the consequences." Corbin shook his head. His breaths coming faster, more uneven. "You don't have to." Seraphina cut him off. "No. You don't get to beg now." That silenced him. The truth settled in his expression like a slow-moving poison spreading through his already broken body. He had thought he could regain control. Thought that if he could just overpower her he could erase what had happened at the station, could somehow rewrite the story in a way that put him back on top. But instead he had cemented his own downfall. The sound of distant sirens began to rise in the still air. The unmistakable wail cutting through the morning quiet. Corbin's jaw tightened. His hands twitched. Seraphina saw the moment the last bit of resistance bled out of him. He was not just physically beaten. He was finished. The sirens grew louder, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting against the glossy surface of his car as 3 patrol vehicles pulled onto the empty stretch of road. The officers moved quickly, the tires grinding against the pavement as doors swung open. Seraphina stepped back, her hands relaxed at her sides, making sure there was no ambiguity when they saw the scene. She did not need to justify herself. The damage spoke for itself. One of the officers, a middle-aged sergeant with sharp, assessing eyes, strode forward, his gaze shifting between Seraphina and Corbin before settling on her with a flicker of recognition. "Colonel Reyes," he greeted, professional but alert. "Dispatch said this was serious?" Seraphina nodded once. "It is." She motioned toward Corbin, who was still slumped against his car, eyes burning with silent, helpless rage. "This man," she said evenly, "attacked me. He attempted to run me off the road. He pursued me with clear intent to cause harm. I defended myself, detained him, and now he's yours." The officer's eyes darkened as he turned toward Corbin, finally processing just who they were dealing with. Corbin barely lifted his head, his teeth grinding together, his entire body tense. "Is that so?" the sergeant murmured, tilting his head. His voice was almost mocking, but the disdain in his eyes was clear. He turned, gesturing to his men. "Cuff him." Two officers stepped forward without hesitation. Corbin jerked instinctively, his body stiffening as they grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back, snapping the cuffs into place with a sharp metallic click. He winced, his breath catching, but he didn't fight them. Seraphina watched, unreadable, as the officers pulled Corbin upright. His posture no longer one of authority, no longer even one of defiance. He looked smaller now, shrunken under the weight of everything he had lost. "Corbin," the sergeant mused, shaking his head. "Man, you really screwed yourself, huh?" Corbin didn't answer. Seraphina didn't look away. One of the officers nudged him forward, leading him toward the patrol car, but just before he was forced inside, Corbin's head lifted slightly, his gaze locking onto Seraphina one last time. And in that moment she saw it. The hate was still there, buried beneath his bruised and battered pride. But now it was joined by something else. Fear. Seraphina held his stare, her voice even. "Final. You did this to yourself," she said simply. The door slammed shut. The patrol vehicle pulled away, taking Corbin with it. Seraphina exhaled, rolling her shoulders as the remaining officers gathered their statements, confirming the details of what had transpired. She gave them everything they needed. Clear, professional, undeniable. There would be no loopholes, no technicalities. Corbin was not walking away from this. By the time it was all over and the officers had begun to clear the scene, the sergeant turned back toward her, his expression shifting just slightly. "You're good?" he asked. More of a quiet acknowledgement than a question. Seraphina nodded. "I will be." She turned, heading toward her SUV. The weight of the past finally lifted. Corbin had thought this was a fight about control. But what he had never understood was that he had already lost before he ever stepped onto the battlefield. And now he would spend the rest of his life paying for that mistake. Seraphina had no intention of letting Corbin slip through the cracks of a flawed system. No intention of allowing him to quietly disappear without answering for what he had done. Men like him, men who abused their positions, who used authority as a weapon rather than a responsibility, had gotten away with too much for too long. She was not just going to hold him accountable. She was going to make sure he could never wield power over anyone again. The process started the moment she walked out of the police station after giving her full statement. The officers had been professional, some even apologetic, but she knew how these things worked. A man like Corbin had connections. There were people in that department who had likely covered for him before. People who might still be willing to vouch for him, to twist the narrative, to turn this into something it was not. She was not about to let that happen. Seraphina pulled out her phone and made 2 critical calls. The first was to her lawyer. She had no doubt that Corbin would try to paint himself as the victim, that he would spin the story however he could to avoid accountability. She needed to be ahead of him. She needed airtight charges that could not be dismissed. A legal case so solid that no department, no union, no sympathetic friend on the force would be able to shield him from it. She pressed charges for assault, attempted vehicular homicide, and reckless endangerment. She documented every detail, provided the officers with the dashcam footage from her SUV, ensuring that no part of this was left to interpretation. The moment Corbin tried to plead his case, there would be hard evidence waiting to shut him down. The second call was to a journalist she trusted. The story needed to be told. Not just what had happened to her, but everything Corbin had done over the years, everything that had been swept under the rug. Seraphina knew how to pull the right strings, how to use her influence in ways that could not be ignored. She made sure her account of what happened was on record, on the air, and in front of the public. And once the story broke, it did not stop. Within hours, Corbin's name was plastered across every major news outlet. Police officer under investigation for attempted vehicular assault on U.S. Army Colonel. Formerly disciplined officer faces serious charges. History of complaints uncovered. Did the system protect a repeat offender? An examination of Corbin's record. Seraphina had not needed to say much. The facts spoke for themselves. It turned out Corbin had a history, a long one. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation tactics. All things that had been buried beneath bureaucracy, dismissed with weak internal reviews, hidden behind departmental silence. But this time he was not getting a quiet transfer. He was not getting a second chance. The internal review opened almost immediately. Officers who had once turned a blind eye were now scrambling to distance themselves. Suddenly eager to cooperate. Suddenly concerned about departmental integrity. Corbin was suspended indefinitely while the investigation continued. But Seraphina already knew how it would end. With public pressure mounting, with his past being dragged into the light, and with criminal charges stacking up against him, there was no saving his career. By the end of the week his termination was official. By the end of the month his trial date was set. Seraphina did not celebrate when she got the confirmation. She did not need to. This was not about victory. It was about justice, about ensuring that men like Corbin could never use their badges as weapons again. When the final announcement came through, the department's formal statement confirming that Corbin was no longer an officer, Seraphina simply exhaled. The weight of it settling over her in quiet finality. She had done what needed to be done. And Corbin, he had finally lost everything. Seraphina knew that justice was not just about pressing charges and walking away. Knowing Corbin would serve his sentence. It was not enough to simply see his name smeared across headlines or to hear about his termination from the force. She understood that a man like him, even after facing consequences, would search for another way back in. Whether it was through private security, consulting, or some backdoor loophole that allowed him to retain even a fraction of the power he had abused for years. She had seen it happen before. Officers disgraced in one department only to resurface in another under the right political climate. Their records conveniently overlooked. Their histories rewritten by the people who wanted to believe they had been wrong. That was not going to happen here. Seraphina filed a civil lawsuit against him, ensuring that whatever came next he would face financial ruin alongside his already irreparable reputation. The injuries she sustained during his attack, her bruised ribs, the swelling in her jaw from where he had landed his desperate punches, were enough to justify damages in court. And that was only the beginning. Her vehicle, though still operational, had taken serious damage from his reckless pursuit, further proving his intent to harm and destroy rather than serve and protect. But this lawsuit was not just about the physical toll. It was about ensuring Corbin had nothing left to rebuild from with the weight of a legal judgment hanging over his head. No police department, no security firm, no federal agency would ever dare employ him again. If there was even the slimmest possibility that he might worm his way into another position of authority, she would make sure the lawsuit followed him like a scarlet letter, a permanent stain that could not be erased. And as expected, the moment news of her lawsuit broke, the entire community reacted. The fallout was immediate and explosive, sparking a firestorm of debates and heated opinions from every corner of the city. People chose sides, argued, fought, exposed their biases as stories like this always did, bringing out the best and worst in the public. Some called her a hero. There were those who saw the truth for what it was, who recognized Corbin for the predator he had always been, who understood that had she been anyone else, someone without her rank, without her training, without her resources, the outcome would have been entirely different. She was praised for standing her ground, for refusing to let a man with a badge use it as a weapon against her, for ensuring that Corbin didn't just lose his job. He lost the ability to ever do this again to anyone else. But then there were the others, the ones who refused to believe she had acted in self-defense, the ones who insisted Corbin had been set up, the ones who took to online forums, news comment sections, and social media platforms, spewing the same tired rhetoric that always surfaced in cases like this. She should have just complied. He was just doing his job. The media always goes after good cops. Another officer sacrificed because of political pressure. Women like her think they can get away with anything. None of it surprised Seraphina. She had expected it. She had seen how the world responded to men like Corbin when they were finally held accountable. There was always a segment of the population willing to ignore the evidence, willing to twist the story into something more comfortable, something that allowed them to cling to their deeply ingrained biases rather than accept the facts. But none of it affected her. She had spent years in war zones. She had walked through places where life and death were separated by mere seconds, where every decision carried real lasting consequences. The opinions of people who had never fought for anything, who had never stood for anything more than their own manufactured outrage, meant nothing to her. Seraphina did not entertain their arguments. She did not sit for interviews. She did not engage in the debates. She let the facts speak for themselves. Corbin had hunted her. He had attempted to run her off the road. He had attacked her with full intent to inflict harm, possibly even kill her. And when it had come down to a fight, when there was no badge left to protect him, when he was forced to stand on his own against someone stronger, more disciplined, more skilled, he had lost. That was the truth. And no matter how many people tried to spin it, no matter how many voices screamed for his redemption, the reality remained unchanged. His name was ruined. His career was over. And now, with the lawsuit in place, with every financial and legal door slammed shut in his face, Corbin had no escape, no way to rebuild, no path back to the life he had once used as a tool for power and control. Seraphina continued living her life, unaffected by the noise, unshaken by the backlash, unbothered by the people who had chosen to make this a fight about ideology rather than the facts. She had done what needed to be done, not for recognition, not for applause, not for any personal satisfaction, but because it was right. Corbin had believed this was about power. But real power had never belonged to him. And now, after everything, he finally understood that. The day of the trial arrived with the weight of inevitability. For weeks the city had been buzzing with anticipation. With every major news outlet covering the downfall of the once protected officer now facing serious criminal charges, the courtroom was packed. The tension thick as people watched with sharp, unblinking focus, waiting to see if the system would truly hold one of its own accountable. Seraphina walked in with the same unwavering confidence she had carried since the moment this all began. She wasn't here for spectacle. She wasn't here for vengeance. She was here because justice demanded it. At the defendant's table, Corbin sat with his legal team. His expression hardened, defiant. He still believed he could beat this. Still believed that somehow in some way he could walk out of this unscathed. There was no regret in his eyes. No humility. Only a man who still thought he had been wronged. Seraphina exhaled slowly as she took her seat near the front, her posture straight, composed as the prosecution began its opening statements. The evidence against Corbin was damning. The dashcam footage played first, showing every critical moment, the illegal stop, the aggressive escalation, the chase, and finally the brutal fight. The court watched as Corbin tried to force her off the road, as he lunged at her with unchecked fury, as he lost control not just of the situation but of himself. Then came the witness statements from fellow officers, some who had once defended him, now forced to admit the undeniable truth. Internal Affairs had conducted its investigation, unearthing years of misconduct. And suddenly those who had once shielded him were desperate to distance themselves. When the prosecution called Seraphina to the stand, she rose without hesitation, walking forward with measured steps, her eyes focused ahead. As she took her seat, she could feel the weight of Corbin's stare. He was watching her, studying her, searching for something. A weakness, a hesitation, a sign that he could twist the narrative. He would find none. The prosecutor approached, his voice clear, steady. "Colonel Reyes, can you describe the events of the morning in question?" Seraphina inhaled slowly, ensuring her voice was calm, professional, and controlled. "I was driving to work, using my usual route, when I noticed flashing lights behind me. I pulled over as I have always done when stopped by law enforcement. But it became immediately clear that Officer Corbin had no legal reason for stopping me." The prosecutor nodded, pacing slightly in front of the jury. "How did you come to that conclusion?" Seraphina did not hesitate. "Because I asked him directly why I was being stopped, and he failed to provide a legitimate answer. Instead, he immediately questioned whether I was in the military, doubted my rank when I told him I was a colonel, and began escalating the situation unnecessarily." The prosecutor turned to the jury, letting her words sink in. Then he turned back to her. "Did you have any reason to believe that this was a routine traffic stop?" Seraphina's gaze did not waver. "No." "And why is that?" "Because he treated me like a suspect the moment he saw me," she stated plainly. "It was not about law enforcement. It was about power. And when I did not give him the reaction he expected, he pushed harder." Corbin shifted at the defense table, his fingers curling into fists, his jaw tight. He hated hearing this. He hated that she was dismantling him piece by piece in front of everyone. The prosecutor nodded, moving to the next part of the case. "At what point did the situation escalate beyond verbal confrontation?" Seraphina exhaled slightly, recalling the moment vividly when he demanded I exit the vehicle without cause. "I asserted my rights, refusing to comply without a legitimate reason, and he immediately threatened me with arrest. It was clear that his intention was to intimidate me into submission. And when that did not work," Seraphina's eyes flickered toward Corbin for the briefest moment before returning to the prosecutor, "he called for backup and then proceeded to conduct an unlawful search of my vehicle, rifling through my belongings, looking for anything he could use to justify his actions. When he found nothing, he still refused to let me leave. He wanted control. That was all this ever was." The prosecutor let the moment linger before continuing. "And then later, after the incident was reported and he was suspended." "What happened?" Seraphina kept her expression neutral. But inside she felt the weight of the memory settle over her. "He found me again," she said, her voice even. "He used his personal vehicle to follow me, to corner me on an empty road, and then attempted to run me off the highway." "Would you say he was attempting to harm you?" Seraphina tilted her head slightly. "I would say he was attempting to kill me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Corbin's legal team shifted uncomfortably while he stared daggers into her, his entire body stiff with anger. The prosecutor nodded as if expecting the answer. "And when you were forced to defend yourself, what was his response?" Seraphina let out a slow breath. "He did not stop. Even after it was clear he could not win. Even after I gave him multiple opportunities to walk away, he refused. He was not just fighting for survival. He was fighting for control. And when I took that away, when I left him no choice but to face the reality of his actions, he did what men like him always do." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Seraphina finally turned her head fully, looking straight at Corbin as she answered. "He ran." Corbin's face darkened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. It was the first time she had acknowledged him directly, and it hit him like a slap to the face. The prosecutor nodded, turning back to the judge. "No further questions." Seraphina stepped down from the witness stand, her movements measured, composed, unshaken. As she took her seat again, she did not glance in Corbin's direction. He was not worth the energy. The trial stretched on, but the damage had already been done. His past had been exposed. His actions had been laid bare. His credibility was in shambles. The courtroom felt heavier now, thick with a tension that pressed against the walls, as if the very air had absorbed the weight of everything that had been revealed. The trial had lasted for days, but in reality Corbin had lost long before the jury had been sent to deliberate. His past had been unraveled thread by thread. Each incident of racial profiling, each use of excessive force, each complaint that had been buried by his superiors, all of it dragged into the light, all of it undeniable. And yet he sat there rigid, unyielding, refusing to break. The judge, an older man with sharp, calculating eyes, adjusted his glasses as he prepared to deliver the final sentence. He glanced over at the defense table, his expression unreadable. "Before we proceed," the judge said, voice calm but firm, "the court will allow the defendant to make a statement." The room shifted. A murmur rippled through the audience. The anticipation was thick because this was it. Corbin's last chance to explain himself, to take responsibility, to show even the slightest acknowledgement of the harm he had caused. Seraphina did not react. She simply folded her hands in her lap. Waiting. Corbin stood slowly, straightening his jacket, his posture stiff, his jaw locked. He looked out at the room, at the faces staring back at him, at the jury that had already condemned him, at the press in the back row eager to capture his downfall. For the first time since the trial began he finally spoke. "I was doing my job." The words hung in the air for a moment, as if he expected them to carry more weight than they did. Seraphina remained still, watching, listening. Corbin exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the sides of the defense table, his knuckles white with tension. "You can sit here and say whatever you want about me. You can bring up every complaint, every so-called investigation, every time some civilian thought I was too aggressive, too forceful, too quick to act." He paused, shaking his head, his voice hardening. "But none of you have ever worn this badge. None of you know what it is like out there." There it was. Seraphina could feel the quiet shift in the room. The way the jury members exchanged glances, the way the prosecutor sat back slightly, letting Corbin bury himself deeper. Corbin took a slow breath, his voice growing more strained. "Every day I put on that uniform and walked into the unknown, never knowing if I'd make it back home. Every stop, every call, every encounter could be the one that ended my life. And you expect me to hesitate? You expect me to second-guess my instincts?" His eyes flickered toward Seraphina for just a second before snapping back to the judge. "I saw a situation and I handled it the way I was trained to. You think I am the only one who would have done what I did? You think any other cop would not have done the same?" Seraphina remained expressionless, but inside she recognized his words for exactly what they were. An admission wrapped in defiance. Corbin was not apologizing. He was not showing remorse. He was justifying. The problem was no one in that room was buying it anymore. The judge took a moment before speaking, as if giving Corbin space to realize his mistake, as if waiting for him to understand that he had just made things worse for himself. "You claim you were just doing your job," the judge said, voice measured, deliberate. "And yet the evidence presented in this courtroom shows a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond law enforcement. What we have seen here is not the result of instinct or training but a willful abuse of power." Corbin's jaw ticked, but he remained silent. The judge continued. "You acted not out of necessity but out of personal resentment. You did not pursue Colonel Reyes because she posed a threat. You pursued her because she did not submit to you in the way you expected. You did not arrest her because she was guilty of a crime. You arrested her because you could not tolerate a black woman, let alone a decorated military officer challenging your authority." A ripple of reaction coursed through the courtroom, the air shifting with the finality of the statement. Corbin stood still, his shoulders squared, but there was no more fire in his eyes. Only the dull flicker of a man finally realizing that he had lost. The judge looked directly at him. "Now you have displayed no remorse, no willingness to acknowledge the harm you have caused, and no understanding of the abuse of power that led you here today. Given the gravity of your actions, this court finds it necessary to impose a maximum sentence." Corbin inhaled sharply, his chest rising, his fingers gripping the table like he was trying to physically hold on to whatever control he still thought he had. Seraphina watched him without emotion. She had known this moment would come. Had known that no matter how much he tried to resist it, Corbin would face the consequences of his choices. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the sentence. Mr. Corbin, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for attempted vehicular homicide, aggravated assault, and abuse of power under the color of law. You will be stripped of any law enforcement privileges and you will no longer be eligible to serve in any official capacity in any government or security role upon your release. Corbin's entire body went still, his breath catching in his throat as the weight of the judge's words settled over him like a crushing force. 15 years. The number echoed in his head, louder than the murmurs rippling through the courtroom, louder than the sound of his own pulse hammering against his skull. The final blow had landed. Not just in the sentence itself, but in the absolute finality of it. There was no escape. The sharp crack of the gavel against the wood rang through the silence, sealing his fate in a single decisive moment. Within seconds the bailiffs moved in, stepping to either side of him, their hands firm as they prepared to take him away. There was no ceremony to it. No hesitation. It was just another part of the process. Another convicted man being escorted to his future behind bars. Corbin turned his head, his movements slow, deliberate, as if his body were struggling to keep up with the reality unfolding around him. His gaze locked onto Seraphina. And for the first time the fire that had burned behind his eyes, the arrogance, the rage, the unwavering belief in his own superiority was gone. What replaced it was something deeper, something darker, something hollow. Seraphina met his stare, but not with triumph, not with satisfaction, not with anything resembling victory. She did not need to gloat. There was nothing left to prove. He had done this to himself. His lips parted slightly, his throat working as if he wanted to speak, as if he had something left to say. One last argument, one last excuse. One last desperate grasp for control. But no one was listening. The bailiffs pulled him back, their grip firm, their movements efficient. His hands were cuffed, his shoulders hunched, his steps dragging as they guided him toward the exit. Whatever future he had once envisioned for himself, whatever power he had once held, whatever authority he had once wielded was gone. Seraphina rose from her seat, inhaling deeply, letting the weight of it all settle into her chest. She had spent months fighting for this moment, for accountability, for the kind of justice that men like Corbin had evaded for too long. And now it was done. As she took her first step toward the doors, the noise of the courtroom faded behind her. The case was over. The verdict rendered. The sentence final. For the first time since this all began, she could finally walk away. Corbin sat in the cold, sterile holding cell. His back pressed against the unforgiving metal bench, his wrists sore from the pressure of the handcuffs that had only recently been removed. The walls around him felt smaller than they should have, as though they were slowly closing in, suffocating him with the weight of everything that had led him to this moment. It had all happened so quickly. The verdict, the gavel's sharp crack against the wood, the murmurs of satisfaction from the gallery, and the feel of the bailiff's hands gripping his arms as they led him away. He had heard every sound, every movement, but none of it had seemed real until now. Until the silence pressed against his skin. Until there was nothing left to distract him from the truth. For years he had convinced himself that men like him did not lose. The system had always protected him, had shielded him from consequences, had assured him that no matter how many complaints were filed, no matter how many times he crossed the line, there would always be someone willing to look the other way. It was how things had always been. How they were supposed to be. But that illusion had shattered the moment he was forced into that chair and told to listen to people like her, Seraphina Reyes. He had believed that by the time this was over she would be the one humiliated. The one questioning whether she had overstepped. The one forced to justify herself under the scrutiny of a system designed to favor men like him. He had thought he could twist the truth, manipulate the narrative, cast doubt where there should have been none. But no matter how many times he tried to frame himself as the real victim, the facts had crushed him beneath their weight, leaving him exposed for what he truly was. His fingers curled against his knee, his nails digging into the fabric of his jumpsuit as his mind circled around the same unrelenting thought. How had it come to this? He had known better than anyone how the game was played, had seen countless others slip through the cracks, had watched as officers far worse than him had simply been reassigned, their records scrubbed clean. But somehow he had not only been caught. He had been made an example of. His career, his reputation, his life as he had known it had been ripped away piece by piece until there was nothing left. The more he thought about it, the more his stomach twisted, burning with resentment, with the deep, gnawing feeling that this was not supposed to happen to him. If Reyes had just backed down that day, if she had just done what he expected her to, if she had just swallowed her pride and shown him the respect he deserved, none of this would have happened. She had humiliated him back then, had stripped him of his authority, had challenged him in a way that no one ever had before. And even now, even after everything, even knowing that he was the one sitting in the cell preparing for a future behind bars, he still hated her for it. But hatred would not change anything. Seraphina Reyes had won and he had lost. No matter how many times he replayed the events in his head, no matter how much he tried to convince himself that the system had turned against him, he could no longer deny the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. He had been wrong. He had let his own arrogance, his own misplaced sense of superiority, drive him into making one mistake after another, each one worse than the last, each one sealing his fate a little more until there was no way out. And now it was too late to undo any of it. As he stared at the gray walls in front of him, the weight of his choices crushing him from the inside out, he finally understood what it meant to be powerless. Seraphina stood at the courthouse steps, her gaze drifting across the cityscape as she allowed herself a rare, measured breath of relief. The trial had concluded. The fight was over. And justice had finally been served. Not just for her but for everyone who had ever been forced to endure what men like Corbin had inflicted on them. This had never been just about one case, one moment, one incident. This had been about the greater battle, the one that so many had fought before her, and the one that would continue long after today. Corbin had been held accountable, stripped of his title, his influence, and his ability to ever wield power against those beneath him again. His name, once associated with unchecked authority, was now synonymous with disgrace. The badge that he had once hidden behind, the one that had protected him for so long, had been reduced to nothing more than a reminder of everything he had lost. But even now, even knowing that he would spend years in a prison cell, Seraphina knew this fight would never truly be over. She had seen it before. Men like him always found supporters, always found those willing to twist the truth to fit their own narratives, always found people who would insist that he had been wrong, that he had been made an example of for no reason other than political pressure. There would be backlash. There always was. But she did not care. She had not come this far to concern herself with the opinions of those who had no interest in the truth. What mattered was that the system had done what it was meant to do, that it had worked for once, that justice had been carried out in a way that left no room for doubt. Corbin had been given every opportunity to show remorse, to take responsibility, to acknowledge what he had done, but he had refused at every turn. His pride had been his undoing, and now he would have to live with the consequences of his own choices. Seraphina took a slow step forward, her posture straight, her movements unhurried, her resolve as strong as it had ever been. The road ahead would not be easy, but it never had been. She had learned long ago that change was never simple, that it was always met with resistance, that there would always be those who wanted to preserve a system that worked in their favor. But that had never stopped her before, and it would not stop her now. As she reached her car, she glanced up at the sky, exhaling one last breath, letting the weight of it all settle where it needed to, no longer carrying it with her. The fight was not over, but she had won this battle. And for now that was enough. Seraphina had never been the type to seek recognition. She had spent years in the military, serving with discipline and focus, never expecting applause, never chasing accolades. She had done what needed to be done because it was right. Not because she wanted to be celebrated for it. But in the weeks following the trial, As the media storm gradually died down, the recognition found her anyway. The Pentagon issued a formal statement commending her professionalism, highlighting the way she had carried herself throughout the ordeal. She had faced an injustice and handled it with composure, refusing to let emotion cloud her judgment, refusing to let the situation spiral into something more volatile. The military community, which had followed the case with a vested interest, took note of how she had not only defended herself but had done so while upholding the integrity of her uniform. She had not been reckless. She had not been careless. She had followed protocol and taken every necessary step to ensure that the system worked as it should. Her commanding officers reached out personally, expressing their respect, some even telling her that what she had done would serve as an example for others. She had not just fought for herself. She had fought against an abuse of power that had gone unchecked for too long, and she had won. Still, for Seraphina, the real victory was not in the headlines that called her a testament to discipline and justice, or in the messages of support that poured in from people she had never met. The real victory was in knowing that she had stood her ground and refused to let a man like Corbin walk away from what he had done. She returned to duty as if nothing had changed. Her uniform still fit the same. Her posture remained upright. Her voice held the same unwavering authority. But in truth she was sharper now, more certain than ever that some battles were worth fighting. She did not speak of Corbin unless directly asked, and even then her answers were short and final. There was nothing more to say. She had done what was necessary, and he had been left to deal with the consequences of his own choices. While Seraphina moved forward, Corbin remained trapped in the wreckage of his own making. The media coverage had been relentless. His name had become synonymous with disgrace, his career obliterated, his reputation beyond repair. No police department would ever touch him again. No private security firm, no consulting job, no government contract. His record was now a permanent stain, one that no amount of favors or connections could wash away. The officers who had once laughed at his jokes, who had stood beside him unquestioning, had all distanced themselves. The department had made it clear that he was an embarrassment, a liability they had been forced to cut loose in order to preserve their own image. No one defended him. No one pitied him. For years he had been protected, shielded from the consequences of his own misconduct, assured that no matter how many complaints were filed he would always have a way out. But that safety net had disappeared the moment he chose to escalate things beyond his control. He had thought himself untouchable. He had believed that a woman like Seraphina Reyes would never have the power to challenge him, and yet she had. Now his world was nothing more than a cell. Four walls that held nothing for him but time. Time to sit in silence. Time to think. Time to replay every moment that had led him to this place, to this fate, to this inescapable reality. He had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his future. His name had become a cautionary tale, spoken in hushed tones among officers who had once considered him their own. Seraphina sat at her desk, flipping through mission reports, listening to the steady hum of activity outside her office. There was always another task ahead. Always another assignment waiting. The world had not stopped because of what had happened, and neither had she. The fight had been exhausting, the battle longer than it should have been. But justice had been served. She had seen firsthand what unchecked power could do. What happened when people believed themselves above the law. Corbin had worn his badge as if it had given him dominion over others, as if it had placed him beyond the reach of accountability. He had mistaken authority for control, mistaking fear for respect, and he had believed right up until the very end that he would walk away untouched. But no one was untouchable. Justice had been served, not just in a courtroom, but in the undeniable reality that Corbin had lost everything. Seraphina had seen it through to the end, ensuring that he would never again hold power over another person. And that was enough. As she looked out the window, watching the sun stretch across the base, she let out a slow, steady breath. There was no more fight ahead, no unfinished war waiting to be won. This was the end of the road. The chapter had closed and she was finally free to move forward.